As we pass the halfway point in this series, going team by team, talking about the Seattle Kraken expansion draft coming up this summer, I know what you're probably thinking. We've talked an awful lot about NHL level talent, but Seattle's going to have an AHL affiliate as well, so where are they going to get their players from? Well, that's where teams like the Detroit Red Wings come into play. By the way, if you do find yourself enjoying this video at any point and you'd like to do that kind of thing, the subscribe button down there can probably help you out. Okay, yes, to be fair, Seattle's AHL team won't actually start playing as a full team altogether until the following season, and yes, there are some NHL level players that Detroit does have to offer Seattle, but there also probably will be a number of younger guys on this protection list as well, because for Detroit, they are in the middle of a full-scale rebuild, which can definitely be seen by how last year went for them, as they were probably the one team that wasn't overly disappointed to have the season end early. I mean, for us Mariners fans, we know all too well what this looks like. The Mariners have been rebuilding for most of the last 2 decades now. I mean, okay, they've actually only been truly rebuilding for the last few years, but still. Again though, what that does mean for the Red Wings, especially when it comes to the expansion draft, is that their protection list is going to definitely look a bit on the younger end. And it also does mean that while the 8 skaters and a goalie protection list is not necessarily out of the question, I do think it's much more likely they go with protecting as many guys as possible, so this is probably looking like a 7-3 protection list. So as we get started on the forward end, that means that guys like Dylan Larkin, Anthony Mantha, Tyler Bertuzzi, and Robert Fabry are all pretty likely to be protected, although I wouldn't necessarily say that anybody other than maybe those first 2 is a guaranteed lock. And as far as those last few spots go, well, that's pretty much going to entirely come down to just who performs the best over the rest of this season, and where the Red Wings think they're going to need the most help going forward. But I do think, at least at this point, it's fairly likely that Michael Rasmussen and Evgeny Svechnikov both probably also end up protected. And then that last spot to me right now comes down to a toss-up between Vladislav Namestnikov and Giovanni Smith. But at least right now, I am going to give the edge to Namestnikov because of his experience at the center position, which the Red Wings will need, and also because he's definitely more of a proven commodity at the NHL level, which, again, that just means Smith is probably a little bit easier for them to replace at this moment in time. But again, that definitely could change by the end of the season. And again, I know what you're probably thinking. That really is a young group of players, especially if Smith ends up getting protected over Namestnikov. And while yes, it is true that even a rebuilding team like Detroit, whose future is these younger players, they still do need a couple of veteran guys that can help the younger guys learn the NHL and kind of help get their feet wet so that they're not just learning on their own. But for one thing, I don't really think that any of the veteran players that Detroit has would be all that tempting for Seattle to pick, so there's no point in using a protection slot on them. Plus, on top of that, you can still get more veteran guys to fill that role through free agency, which this is going to be a very active year of. So again, to me at least, it does seem like a fairly easy decision for Detroit to just protect as many of its talented younger players as it can, with Namestnikov, who's 28, being the only potential exception to that, which is something that is still true when it comes to the defensive end of this protection list. Here, the 3 guys I see them protecting are 1, obviously Filip Hronek, who is going to be the easiest decision of a player to protect for the Red Wings, as well as Dennis Cholowski, who also I think is pretty likely to be protected. And then that last spot is a bit of a toss-up, but again, going with the theme of younger players and the future of this team, I think it's most likely right now that Gustav Lindstrom probably gets that protection spot. And then a goal, well, they might as well protect Thomas Greiss, but honestly, it doesn't really matter because Seattle's not going to be taking a goaltender from Detroit. Now, I know that on the defensive end, this would mean exposing guys like Troy Stecher and Danny DeKeyser, who are both under contract next year, which would certainly make them a little bit more tempting of options for the Kraken. Meanwhile, all 3 of the guys that I protected there, as well as a number of the guys I protected on the forward end, are all set to be RFAs at the end of the season. But the fact of the matter is Detroit really just doesn't have that many players signed for next year, so there's going to be a lot of extensions coming before the expansion draft. Oh, and before I get any comments about it, it's also probably a good idea to mention that, again, as this is a young team, they do have a fairly extensive exempt list that includes names like Velino and especially Zadina. Now, yes, I had just finished recording this video and I had started editing it when the Red Wings decided to go ahead and waive Evgeny Svechnikov. Now, there's no guarantee that he still doesn't end up being protected by the team. After all, he could clear waivers, stay with the Red Wings, and they could still end up protecting him. But being waived halfway through the season right before the expansion draft does not seem like a good sign that the Red Wings are thinking about protecting him when that time does come. And if in fact that does prove to be true and he ends up off this protection list, then that does open up the door for Detroit then to be able to protect both Nemesnikov and Smith. But we're still going to go ahead and look at both of those players anyway, because clearly there's still some things that could be changing with the Red Wings. The one guy, though, on the forward end who does have a contract through 2022, who would be an exception to that, and also could be a tempting option for Seattle, which is why he's one of the trendier picks for who the Kraken will take, would be the last guy I protected in Nemesnikov. If he does turn out to be available, the 28-year-old former first-round pick certainly would be a tempting option for the Kraken, again, especially with that center experience, which is something the Kraken will definitely be hurting to find. In his career, he's played in at least part of 8 different NHL seasons, in that time playing in 461 games where he has 200 points on 89 goals and 111 assists. So at least throughout the bulk of his career, outside of those first couple of seasons, he has been right around that half a point per game type of player. And this being his first season in Detroit, you can see that that hasn't necessarily held up to be the case this season, but again, these are the Red Wings and they aren't scoring a whole lot of points. I mean, more than some teams, but still. And as you continue on to more of his possession metrics, well, there too, he looks to be kind of an average to maybe slightly below average player, though he has started to struggle a little bit more in those areas in the last couple of years. But one thing that, especially in his last few seasons, he has not struggled with that we have talked about a few times, being something that Seattle might be looking for, is that he has proven to be a pretty physical forward, with over 100 hits in each of his last 2 seasons and already 50 in his 36 games this year. And of course, again, another one of the reasons that it would seem like he's one of the more tempting options from the Red Wings for a player for the Kraken to select is again that fact that he is one of the few players the Red Wings have that's currently under contract through next season, where he will be paid $2 million. But if just for a second we ignore which players have contracts, and at least right now which ones more importantly do not have contracts for next season, then there is at least one other option on the forward end with a fair amount of experience that I could see the Kraken going for in a bit of a younger player that not a whole lot of people have been talking about from what I can see. That being Adam Erne. The soon-to-be 26-year-old forward has played in at least part of 5 different NHL seasons where he's played in 200 games with just 43 points on 22 goals and 21 assists. And it probably is that lower points production, especially with just 5 points in 56 games last year, that is the reason not too many people have been talking about him up to this point. But at least so far this season, he definitely has stepped up his points production quite a bit, with already over double his points production from last year, with 11 points on 7 goals and 4 assists in 30 games. And while, like Nemesnikov, his advanced stats are nothing more than average to maybe slightly below average, he too has been a very physical player over the last couple of years, with 159 hits in his last season in Tampa Bay and then another 142 last season, and again is on pace for nearly 2 hits per game this season. So if Nemesnikov turns out to not be available, and when it comes to Detroit, the Kraken are looking for more of maybe a 3rd or 4th line type of player going forward, then he could definitely offer some of that with his physical game. Although, with all that being said, there probably is a reason that not all that many people have been talking about Erne up to this point. And that's because if the Kraken do go the younger route and it isn't Nemesnikov that they end up with, they probably do have a couple of better options that will be available, assuming that they get contracts. But again, even if they don't have a contract, they could still be a selection for the Kraken. So given the protection list that I went with, probably then the 2 most tempting options left would be Taro Hirose and Givani Smith. Both have had fairly limited NHL experience to this point, with Hirose, who is a year older at the age of 24, having played a little bit more and having a little bit more points production in the time he's played, with 16 points in his 42 games to Smith's 7 points in 30 games, both with 3 goals. Though, with that being said, in the games they have played at the NHL level, Hirose has seen the ice quite a bit more than Smith has, nearly 4 minutes more per game, and at least so far to this point this season, Smith has played a little bit more, having played in 9 games, and does have more points production to show for it, with 4 points on 1 goal and 3 assists. Meanwhile, Hirose has just 2 points on 2 assists in 6 games. And at the AHL level, both have played pretty well there this season, both being right around a point per game player. Although, that being said, Hirose does have a little bit more of a track record of being a points producer in the past than Smith has. So at this point, probably the two biggest differences between the two players is that Hirose is a little over a year and a half older than Smith, and he is also set to be UFA at the end of this season, while Smith is set to be an RFA. So maybe that makes it a little bit more likely that Hirose would see a contract first, but ultimately the more tempting option would be the one with a contract, and if neither has a contract, then it really doesn't matter whether they're an RFA or a UFA to the Kraken, assuming they get a deal worked out with them and sign them anyway. On the defensive end though, contract speculating is probably not something they'd have to worry too much about, because if again that protection list holds up, then Troy Stecher is probably the most tempting option here, and again, he is under contract for next season. The soon-to-be 27-year-old right-shotted defenseman has played in 313 career games over the course of 5 NHL seasons, where he has 82 points on 12 goals and 70 assists. So to be honest, he doesn't really necessarily stand out in any particular aspect of his game, but he is a very solid two-way defenseman that does have a decent amount of NHL experience and again is just 27 years old. Plus, being a right-shotted defenseman is a bit of a bonus. Plus, there is also the fact that he spent his first 4 NHL seasons in Vancouver, so him coming to Seattle could only probably help that rivalry early on. Not that that is or should be something that Seattle's even looking at or considering when it comes to picking players in the expansion draft, but for what it's worth, there it is. Now, of course, much like with that last spot or 2 on the forward end, the last spot on the defensive end is still very much up in the air, and I definitely could see an argument for the Red Wings protecting Stecher, in which case I think it's most likely that Lindstrom's probably the one that would end up getting exposed. But at just the age of 22 and him being another right-shotted defenseman, on top of the fact that he's played very well this season so far at the AHL level, I do think that it's much more likely with this team looking towards the future that they would protect him over Stecher. Especially also considering the fact that in his first season in Detroit, Stecher so far only has 6 points in 26 games. So again, probably more likely looking towards the younger guy and the future here for Detroit. Of course, then the other notable name and the other guy already under contract for next season on the defensive end would be longtime Red Wing Danny DeKeyser. Now, DeKeyser does have nearly 500 games of NHL experience to offer and has been a productive player on both ends of the ice throughout the course of his career. Plus, he's the only player that we've talked about today that's been with the Red Wings long enough to remember when they weren't terrible. That all having been said, though, it's partly because of that he is now at 31 years old and did miss almost all of last season due to injury, so I really just don't see him being all that tempting of an option for the Kraken. Plus, the Kraken will be selecting 30 players in the expansion draft, which will not only help fill out the NHL roster, but will also help to start fill out that AHL roster. And especially when it comes to a team like the Red Wings, who just don't offer a whole lot at the NHL level, this is a prime place to start looking for some of that AHL level prospect talent. And yes, granted, much like what Vegas did, there will be a few players taken in this expansion draft that will end up getting traded right away, or maybe even a couple that are just let go. But again, with the Red Wings, I don't know how much there is as far as players that the Kraken could flip, so again, we're back to them probably taking some younger prospect level talent. So ultimately, when it comes down to it with Detroit, really the only NHL producing player that I could see the Kraken taking would be Svechnikov if he is available, or maybe Stecher, but ultimately I'd like to see the Kraken go with one of the younger guys, like Giovanni if he's available, or Lindstrom if he's available. Oh, and if Svechnikov isn't claimed off of waivers, stays with Detroit, and isn't protected, then I do actually think he could be a pretty decent option for the Kraken to take. He does have 9 points in 30 NHL games, and at the age of 24 still could have plenty of hockey ahead of him, so for one, I'm kind of confused why they waived him, but maybe it could benefit the Kraken down the road. And yes, with the way the contracts are for Detroit right now, maybe that means that this is one of the few places the Kraken take a player that they have to negotiate a contract with. I know that doesn't happen very often and probably won't happen very often even with the number of contracts expiring and the flat cap, but it's still something that I think could be pretty likely with some of these younger guys. As far as any potential side deals go with Detroit, I don't think that one happens here. They don't really have any bad contracts they'd want out of, and I don't think they're too much afraid of losing one young player to go out of their way to make a deal happen. Plus, as far as Seattle is concerned, I don't really know what they could get from the Red Wings that would incentivize them to make a deal, especially considering that all they would end up offering would be a prospect or a draft pick, which I don't think the Red Wings are too much in a hurry to be getting rid of. So for Seattle fans, I really don't know how exciting of a team Detroit is going to be come the expansion draft. But if you are a future fan of the Palm Springs team, then this might be a team to watch for you. But with that, if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Red Wings, their protection list, and who Seattle could end up getting down in the comments section. Otherwise, stay safe out there and be good to each other. Peace.